In this session, we're going to learn about a new tool called Sequencer. Sequencer is going to allow us to take everything we've learned and put it together into an animated scene. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at an example that's been prepared so that we can understand how Sequencer works. If you press Control Space, you'll bring up your content drawer. Now I'd like you to go and on the right over here, hit Dock in Layout. This will make more sense in a second once we start working with Sequencer. Dock in Layout will make it so that the content browser is always visible at the bottom. But don't worry, if you ever want to get rid of it, you can always close it there and reopen it later. For those of you who haven't done the Unreal Primer course, the content browser is kind of like the Finder or Explorer of Unreal. It allows you to navigate and find content within your Unreal Engine project. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to go to the Cinematics folder. So if we look down here on the left, we can see a breakdown. Under all content, you should be able to find Cinematics. So if you click that arrow or click Cinematics itself, you'll then see sequences. So over here, you can double click to open that up and you'll be able to see the example 01 level sequence. Now, pay close attention at what happens when I open this up and see if you can spot the changes. You'll see a few things have changed. Firstly, we get this window down here called Sequencer, and it's full of buttons and options and everything else. But don't worry, we're going to get to them one by one as we need them. Another thing you might have changed is that the character's position changed and the camera's position changed. Now this might be worrying because we spent a bit of time figuring out exactly where we want both of those. But the cool thing about Sequencer is, if I close Sequencer right now, over here with the little X, everything goes back to as it was before. So what's really happening and what is Sequencer? Well, Sequencer acts as the director, and you can kind of think of it as it's a list of instructions for each asset mentioned in the sequence. So let's go through the tracks one by one. So the first track we see here is called Camera Cuts, and you can see it's got little thumbnails right here. Now, a camera cuts track is simply so that Sequencer knows which camera to use. So it's a little hard to see right now, but you should be able to see Cam 01 written next to my cursor right here. And this is simply because the camera cuts track has been assigned Cam 01, and we'll use that for any renders. We can actually preview that by going over here to the little camera icon. If you hover over that and left click on the camera cuts camera icon right here, suddenly our viewport changes and we can see the shot that it's referencing. So this camera icon is a way to view the camera cuts track or the edit, but it's not for changing it. Now that distinction is going to make more sense once we move on to the next track that's been added. So this next track is Cam 01, and if you remember, that's the name we gave our camera when we first created it in one of the previous lessons. So what is actually happening here is Cam 01 has been added to Sequencer, and then it's had some modifications to a few of its parameters. So if we read through here, we can see what has been changed. So in the camera, we've changed the focal length, which is how zoomed in it is. And we've changed the manual focus distance, which is simply where the focus is pointed at. We've also changed the transform right here. So that's a lot of things. So what does this all mean? Well, to visualize this a bit better, I'm going to go back up to the camera cuts track where we've selected our camera icon, and I'm going to select that again to free our view from there. I'm going to change the viewport just so we can get a better angle on what's happening. And for 1 second, I'm going to select the camera in the scene and I'm going to pin the preview so that we can see what happens when Sequencer closes or opens. So I'm going to close Sequence again, just for reference. Just watch what happens to the position of the camera over here and in the preview. You'll see it jumps back to our previous shot. So you can see that it's changing position from the center to over on the left. It's changing the lens and it's changing the focus point. So I'm going to unpin that preview and I'm going to click back over here on the camera cuts. So we can view our edit this way, but if we wanted to change this camera, we can't do it through this viewport. So I'm going to unlock the viewport by clicking the camera icon again. And I'm actually going to click the next camera icon. So this camera icon is tied to the camera itself. So you can think of the camera cuts track as the edit, and you can think of it as viewing the edit in kind of like a read-only way, where you can't actually change it. And you can think of viewing the camera directly through the camera as a way to pilot the camera. You see, once I've clicked the camera icon on the camera itself, I get this little display up the top left. It's got an ejection button and it says Pilot Active Camera 01. And what this actually means is, if I move my camera right now, I'm actually changing the transform track of camera 1. So as an example, if I was to navigate how we usually do in the viewport, hold down right mouse button, move around, and change my frame into something like this, and I eject back out and I view the edit, that is now my new framing. Now I'm going to undo that and come back to here. Okay, now you might have noticed up the top here in Sequencer, we have what's called a timeline. You can click up here in the dark gray area and drag around to move time forward or backwards. Down the bottom left here, you also have various play controls. So I could play, I could skip forward frame by frame, and I could also navigate through the scene in other ways. So if I go back to the start here and click spacebar, it will also play. And we can see that this cradle starts animating. The balls bounce from side to side. So why is that? Well, if I select these in the scene, you can see not only do they come up in the world outliner up the top right, like we discussed before, and the details panel, they also come up in Sequencer because they've already been added here in this sequence. So this one doesn't actually have a transform, but it does have an animation track. So an animation track is a pre-built animation that has been made for a specific asset. Now, what might surprise you about this asset is it is actually a skeletal mesh, just like our character. To illustrate that, I'm going to show you the bone structure in the skeletal mesh editor. I'm just going to double click on it over here. And just like our character before, we open up an editor like this. And if I go character, bones, all hierarchy, you can see it has this skeletal structure. So what the animation is doing is it's animating these bones like this. So coming back to our scene, this animation works nicely, but it suddenly stops partway through. So why is that? Well, it's got an animation track on the left over here, but if you look on the right, in the purple section, this is where the animation track is actually playing. So this animation is what's called a loop. And a loop is something that can play continuously by repeating over and over again. But right now, it's only playing through once. So in order to get it to repeat, we can click on the edge here when we get this little arrow like this, facing two directions. Hold down left mouse button, click and drag, and pull it out to the right until we get to the red line, which is the end of our shot. So clicking away for 1 second, what you'll notice is we get a continuous purple track, but with these lines in the middle. And these lines are where the animation repeats. So now if I go back to the start by clicking in this dark area up the top and then press space to play, The balls will now bounce seamlessly and continuously. I can also play in a loop in Sequencer. So down on the bottom left here, you'll see this last arrow in the controls, and it says no loop in right now. So I'm just going to click that again, and it's going to loop the playback range. So now if I go back to the start and play, when it gets to the end, it jumps straight back to the start and plays again. Now this can be nice to watch animation or to review something to really get a good feel for the changes that need to be made to a shot. Now, if we think back to what happened when we first opened this sequence, there's one more thing we haven't looked at, and that's the character. The character did move when we opened this sequence. So I'm going to expand the sequence window. I'm going to expand the sequencer window out a little bit, just so I can see further down the list. And we have here the sitting mannequin. So clicking here, I can also scroll down to scroll further down the list, although I do lose track of my camera cuts track. So generally you want Sequencer to be open maybe in another window or to take up a large amount of space, just so you can see everything that's going on. So scrolling down here, I have my character. So we can see here that the transform track has been expanded. So what's happened is this sequence has overridden the transform of this object and instructed it to rotate as well as move slightly. Now this can be handy if we want our character to be sitting in a certain part of the frame. In this case, I'm happy with this, but I would like the mannequin to actually play an animation, to have just a little bit of movement in the background, similar to how the cradle is rocking back and forth. So if I select my character, either here or in the scene, or even in the world outliner, I get this details panel. And we can see we've applied our animations like before. So why isn't it animating? Well, for it to animate, Sequencer needs to instruct it to do so that you can preview it in this timeline. So over here on our animation track, we're going to click this plus animation button. Now this is going to give us a list of all the animations that are suitable to play on this character. So we're not going to see the rocking back and forth of the balls because the skeleton structure of those balls is different to the skeletal structure of our character. So I'm going to look for this sitting mannequin animation that we'd had before. And then I'm going to left click on it. It's added that animation to where my time slider is. So if I play this back, it does start animating, but only after 50 or so frames. I'd like it to start playing earlier. So hovering over the animation track under the timeline, you can left click here and drag to the left. And now the animation starts on the green line at the start of my shot, frame 0. So let's play again. And there we go, we've got some subtle animation from our character. But what if I actually preferred some of the motions the character made towards the end of the animation clip? Well, I can left click on this clip and drag it along until I find the animation I like. But I've just got to be careful because it does end at a certain point. So let's, as an example, say this section here where he puts his leg up like that and drops it back down, that's the section I really like at this moment. In fact, I really like how he drops his hands down and his legs fall down, and I'd like that to occur at the same time this ball hits the other ball. So I'm going to go forward to the time when the ball hits just here, and then I'm going to slide my animation along until I see that drop, and there it is, and then back a bit. There we go. So just as the hands come down, and now when I play it through, do you see that thud happens at the same time? Something small, but I like it. But now we have a problem. Our track ends a bit early. Now luckily, this is also a looping track, just like the cradle. So when we hover over, we get those arrows point in each direction. We left click and drag out to the right, and we get the animation to repeat. So you can see here that it seamlessly repeats. So there we have it. This has been a brief introduction to Sequencer, what it is, how it works, and how you can use it to manipulate some objects in your scene. In the next section, we're going to go over actually setting up a sequence from scratch and trying to create that animated scene that we'd originally set out to create.